Okay, so let me start. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new session of the Consciousness and Reality Grad Conference. This is organized by the students in the Mind, the Brain MA program in Cognitive Science at the University of Bucharest. We're delighted that our next speaker is Tung from Western University in the Department of Philosophy and the Rothman Institute. Tung, please take it away.
Okay, so yeah, hello, everyone. I'm Tung Li, and yeah, first I want to thank you for having this wonderful conference, and I think it's time to evaluate how virtual reality could lead us to re-evaluate the major debates in philosophy. So today I will focus on the nature of perceptual experience in VR. So that's my title: Virtual Veridicalism, Cognitive Orientation, and Fregean Representationalism. So according to this title, you will know that my talk will consist in 3 parts. First, I will motivate virtual veridicalism, according to which our experiences in VR can be systematically veridical. Then I introduce the current debate on this issue. And then second, I will assess David Chalmers' defense for virtual veridicalism. Yeah, Chalmers again. So this is the only argument I found arguing for this view so far. So I think Chalmers' argument appeals to the ambiguous notion, which is cognitive orientation. And so in this part, I will disambiguate it and find the best way to interpret Chalmers' defense. But however, I will argue that even the best interpretation is incomplete for defending virtual veridicalism. So that's why in the third part, I turn to the theory of phenomenal content that best supports Chalmers' defense. But I will argue that even this presently best theory can lead only a very limited support, and this is not sufficient for defending virtual veridicalism. Okay, so virtual veridicalism, it signals the influence of computation simulation on our future life. Actually, VR has been integrated in our life for a long time, right? Many activities are accomplished by VR, such as like social activity, entertainment, education, surgery, or and even art performance. So we perceive things in VR, right? We sometimes perceive them as genuine things, and sometimes we just perceive them as a grand illusion. So in that sense, what matters if we perceive virtual things veridically as opposed to perceiving them illusorily, right? So why do we need perceptual veridicality in VR? So here I try to motivate it by an example. Okay, here is a flight training. In a flight training, the trainees using VR devices learn to react appropriately to many situations. And the trainees are immersed in virtual piloting as if they are really piloting a plane. They may perceive the simulation as something really happening and react to seemingly correct information. And this suggests that the trainees should perceive the virtual things veridically, right? So for them to appropriately interact with these situations, their perceptual experiences should convey correct information. So without the correct information, it is hard to see why the virtual training can enhance their piloting skill, right? So we can go to the debate on this issue. So there are 2 main positions. The first, virtual illusionism. It is the view that all VR experiences are illusory, and because we perceive virtual things as having properties that no relevant object has. And there, in contrast, virtual veridicalism claims that, okay, some VR experiences are systematically veridical since we can perceive virtual things as having virtual color, location, shapes, which they do have, which these objects do have. So far in this literature, most of VR researchers are more sympathetic to the first one, to the virtual illusionism. So although they talk about the phenomenology of VR, so most of them still take what the VR user perceives as a sort of illusion. But today, I'm going to assess the argument for the opposite view, for the virtual veridicalism. But before going to the argument, I should note 2 assumptions here in my talk. The first, the debate concerns the VRs that we invent by technology. So in that sense, our ordinary environment is assumed to be non-virtual or physical, if you want. So both views assume that our perception in the ordinary environment is systematically veridical, okay? And second, the debate is not restricted to VR technology right now. It concerns that the VR can what VR can do in principle in future. So the technical issues such as resolution of virtual things are not taken into consideration, because we can assume that it is possible for us to experience a VR environment that is subjectively indistinguishable to non-VR environment. Okay, that's assumption. So now let's turn to Chalmers' defense for virtual veridicalism, according to which, some VR experiences are systemically veridical. And he distinguished two kinds of VR users in the arguments. One is naive users whose VR experiences are illusory because they don't know they are in VR. But for the sophisticated user, on the other hand, who know clearly that they are in VR, so their experiences are systematically veridical because they perceive virtual things as having virtual property. But how do they perceive in this way? Here is Chalmers' argument. P1, sophisticated VR users, when using VR, know that the property they perceive are virtual properties. And since they know that they are in VR, it is an empirical fact. I think everyone will accept that. And P2, if P1 is the case, then that knowledge orients the content of the user's experience such that they perceive virtual objects as having the virtual color, location, and shapes. And this is the phenomenon which Chalmers calls cognitive orientation. Okay, so if this phenomenon really occurs, then we can get the conclusion. Therefore, a sophisticated VR user perceive virtual objects as having virtual color, location, and shape. And virtual veridicalism is true. And we see that in this argument, the phenomenon of cognitive orientation is the key step, right? So Chalmers appeals to an analogical inference for arguing for P2, and it consists of three premises also. And P2.1, sophisticated drivers, when driving, know that the things seen in the rear mirror are located behind the car instead of in front of the car. So this is an empirical fact, right? Being a trained driver, we know that the location of the thing seen in the rear mirror is located behind, right? And the second premise, P2.2, if P2.1 is the case, then that knowledge, orients the content of the driver experience such that they perceive the things in the rear mirror as being located behind the car. So this is the phenomenon of cognitive orientation occurring in the driver case. So the P2.3 is an analogy drawing from the occurrence of cognitive orientation in the driver case to its occurrence in VR user's case, right? That's an analogy inference. So the key for the whole argument is whether the analogical inference P2.3 is strong enough, right? So I will assess this premise soon. But before that, we need to make clear of the notion of cognitive orientation, because since the Chalmers coins these terms and we don't know what exactly is this term, right? And according to Chalmers, cognitive orientation is a sort of cognitive penetration. And cognitive penetration, according to him, is just a case where cognition influences perception. In this case, background knowledge helps orient one to perceive world, giving a global interpretation to what is perceived. That's Chalmers' quotation. But in the relevant literature, cognitive penetration is not just a cognitive influence. The cognitive penetration requires perceptual processes to be synchronously influenced by occurrent cognitive states. In another case, where the cognition influences perception is perceptual learning, which is defined as a long-term change in perceptual content that results from previous experience. So there is ambiguity here. Cognitive orientation might be literally cognitive penetration or perceptual learning, and they both involve the change of perceptual content, but in different manners. So disambiguating them will help us to understand what's going on in VR's users when the cognitive orientation occurs in that case. So I'm going to argue that cognitive orientation cannot be literally cognitive penetration, because in this narrow sense, the analogy from P2.3 doesn't hold, okay? So for the convenience of argument, so let's suppose cognitive orientation is just cognitive penetration, okay? And Chalmers relates cognitive orientation to 4 features, which are knowledge, familiarity, action dependence, and naturalness. And these features are neither necessary nor sufficient condition for cognitive orientation. But it is reasonable to count as a case as cognitive orientation if more features are satisfied by that case, because at least Chalmers used these features to characterize cognitive orientation. Okay, and according to Chalmers, the driver case satisfy all the features. So let's see how. Okay, and first, sophisticated drivers know the rear mirror is present, and that's knowledge, and we all accept that, right? And the second, they are familiar with how mirrors function in perception. So we use mirror elsewhere in our daily life, and we are familiar with how mirror perception is different from ordinary perception. And for action dependence, some patterns of driver's action depends on the interpretation of mirror perception. So for example, if a driver sees a friend in a rear mirror and wants to approach them, so the driver will reverse the car instead of driving forward, right? So that's action dependence. And false naturalness, the interpretation on which the things are located behind is more natural than interpretation on which they are located in the front. And this naturalness depends on the perceptual difference with and without the rear mirror. And it is because the scene seen in the mirror is different from without the mirror. So it is more natural to interpret things in the mirror as having some property different from others, for example, the spatial properties, right? The location property. So now we have this table or check, right, in the driver case. And I'm not going to criticize any of the features in the driver case. I assume that Chalmers is successful in this case. So what I'm going to argue is that even if these features are satisfied in the driver case, they may not be satisfied in the VR user case. Okay, so let's examine the VR user case. Chalmers thinks the VR user case also satisfies these features, but I argue that it doesn't satisfy all. Okay, so this case definitely satisfies knowledge because sophisticated users know that they are in VR. That's the fact. And remind that in the discussion, we don't take the technical limit into consideration and focus on its future possibility. So we assume that we experience a VR environment that appears the same as non-VR environments do. So given this, the rest 3 features may not be satisfied, as I'll argue. So familiarity, when the VR environment looks the same as the non-VR environments, even though the users are familiar with VR, the familiarity doesn't affect us to perceive something differently because both VR and non-VR scenarios impose the same function of what appears to the user. And for the action dependence, okay, we might build up new action pattern to interact with the virtual things. So for example, we might be able to control the movement of virtual things by sight direction, okay? Maybe, I don't know, but it is not necessary because the action patterns in VR could match our action pattern in non-VR environments. So I leave this feature open for now, okay? And regarding naturalness, the interpretation that the perceived things are virtual and the interpretation that they are non-virtual are equally powerful to explain what appears to the user because they appear the same to me, to us, right? So the naturalness is not satisfied either. So we can have the table for the VR user case. We see that there are differences of satisfaction of features between the 2 cases. But this is not sufficient to conclude that, okay, cognitive penetration doesn't occur in the VR user case because, so I would turn to the middle case that will help us to conclude in this way, okay? Okay, that's the middle case. This is the famous Innsbruck Goggle experiment. It was the classical experiment on the perceptual adaptation in 1950s, I guess. So in the experiment, the subjects wore a set of mirror goggles through which they saw the world upside down for a couple of days, and the goggle fully occupied the subject's entire visual field, and the subject were required to do daily activity with that goggle. So during the first 3 days, the subjects could barely accomplish the daily movements such as grabbing or moving because they were not used to reverse the reverse visual scene. By the fifth day, the subject's movement completed to improve, right? And from the sixth day, the subject started to act as if they had not been wearing a goggle. And even one subject could draw a picture in equality as if that participant didn't wear the goggle. Okay, so this is the case. I think it's a good example for us to assess the VR user case in an indirect way. So this experiment resembles VR user case to some degree in that the subject's entire visual field is covered by some tool that affect the entire visual perception, right? We can examine whether the 4 features are satisfied in this case. Okay, so first, the experimenter didn't conceal the fact that Goggle is designed to appear things are upside down. So the participant definitely knew the fact. And second, it is the fact that the participants became familiar with the participant became familiar with the Goggle perception because they learned that, right? And the third one, the participant developed new patterns of action with respect to the upside down scenario. And that was the fact reported by the experimenter. And lastly, as compared to the previous experience, it is natural to interpret seeing the goggle as upside down, right? That's more natural to interpret the things. So we have this table. All features are checked under IgE. So what does it matter? My point is, although these features are all satisfied in IgE, cognitive penetration didn't occur in this case. So the participants' gradual perceptual adaptation in during the sixth day suggests that they learned from the previous experiences and try in error in order to fit their actions into the environment. This suggests that it is not the case that the perceptual process is synchronously influenced by the current cognitive state. So if cognitive penetration occurred, the subject would be able to perceive the upside down world as the ordinary world, and they would not spend 6 days adapting to what appears to them in order to act appropriately. Hence, given that IgE satisfies all the features, but cognitive penetration doesn't occur. So it is untenable to say that cognitive penetration occurs in the VR user case without further evidence, right? So the analogical premise P2.3 doesn't hold if cognitive orientation is just a cognitive penetration. Then we can turn to the second interpretation on which cognitive orientation is just a perceptual learning. Okay, so far, so good. I think it is plausible to say that cognitive orientation is perceptual learning, because perceptual learning is a common way to gain new perceptual content or result in content shift, so that subjects can perceive things more accurately, right? That's the aim of learning. In this way, P2.3 is justified and Chalmers' argument seems to succeed. Yeah. However, when we closely examine Chalmers' conclusion, we find that there are something missing. Okay, so let's read the conclusion again. Conclusion, therefore, sophisticated VR users perceive virtual objects as having the virtual color, location, and shape. So virtual veridicalism is true. But the argument can just conclude the first sentence, right? Sophisticated user perceive blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't tell whether such VR experiences are veridical or not. That means the red arrow doesn't hold, at least for now. So my point is, cognitive orientation only reveals the etiology of content, and it doesn't address the veridicality. Veridicality is by virtue of what are the sophisticated users' experience veridical rather than illusory. So for Chalmers' argument to really defend virtual veridicalism, a theory of content, a theory of perceptual content, especially for phenomenal content, is needed to underlie the phenomenon of cognitive orientation. And we have these candidates. Okay, so for a theory of content to underlie Chalmers' argument, there are 2 desiderata to be satisfied. Okay, for Chalmers, an object is virtually red when it produces reddish experience in conditions that are normal for the virtual reality. So this quotation implies 2 things. Okay, the first, in VR, our reddish experience is produced by virtual redness, right? Which is distinct property from the physical redness. The physical redness is the one producing the same type of experience in non-VR environment. So in that sense, we should have the same phenomenology with respect to the reddish phenomenal type across VR and non-VR environment. Okay. And second, experiences with the same phenomenology are produced by distinctive property with in different environments, right? So the extension of red character should be different across VR and non-VR environment. And with these desiderata, some theories can be precluded from the candidate theory. And for the time limit, I couldn't give you an argument arguing why they are precluded. But at least at the first glance, these theory, causal theory, naive realism, and major Russellian representationalism couldn't simultaneously accommodate these two intuitions. And for the first glance, Fregean representationalism is one of the best candidates. And for the other reason, Chalmers himself proposed kind of Fregean framework. So for the next part, I will just focus on the Fregean representationalism. So what is Fregean representationalism? It's hard to elucidate it in some slide, but I will make it short. So it is a combination of representationalism and Fregeanism. The former is the claim that perceptual content are representational content, and the latter is that representational content are Fregean proposition. So in this way, phenomenal content that supervenes on phenomenal character, is also a Fregean content. And we know that Fregean content involves a distinction between sense and reference, right? In another sense, the distinction between modal presentation and extension. So phenomenal content of perceptual experience also has such a distinction. So for example, phenomenal redness, the phenomenal content that supervenes on the red character, is a phenomenal modal presentation that picks out certain physical surface reflectance, also known as physical redness, as extension, at least in our ordinary world. And the advantage of this view is that the distinction between modal presentation and extension helps explain why the same phenomenal modal presentation can pick out different extension in different conditions. So for instance, Fregean could say that the phenomenal redness here picks out the physical redness as extension in non-VR environment, but it also picks out another property, virtual redness, as extension in VR environment, just as this picture, okay? And how to determine the extension under a certain condition, right? This phenomenal modal presentation are characterized as a condition on extension. And the condition is something like the property normally causes experiences of that content in the subject under certain perceptual condition. So specifically in non-VR environment, the property that normally causes red experience is the physical redness. So physical redness is the extension of phenomenal redness in a non-VR environment, and so long as virtual redness, because virtual redness is the property normally causes reddish experience in non-VR or in VR environment. So it is virtual redness is the extension of phenomenal redness in VR environment. Okay. Now, so we can evaluate whether Fregean representationalism underlie Chalmers' argument. First, it explains phenomenon of cognitive orientation as perceptual learning in that the extension is fixed by certain phenomenal content because it is the normal cause of that content. But subjects should have perceptual history for that property to satisfy as a normal cause in that condition, right? So that's why cognitive orientation doesn't occur in naive user, but only occurs in sophisticated user, because naive user don't have the perceptual history in VR, but sophisticated users have. Okay. And second, the Fregean solution explains the desiderata for the underlying theory. Under Fregean framework, the same phenomenal content that reflect the same phenomenology can pick out different extension under different conditions. And third, it provides a veridicality for VR experience, since the extension of content is determined under Fregean framework, and the veridicality condition is also determined in the way that a VR experience is veridical if and only if its content attribute the extension property to the perceived object, which actually has it. Okay, so far so good. It seems that Fregean representationalism could support virtual veridicalism as well, very well, right? But everything has a but. How about this case? Okay, that's Pokemon Go. I know that these are Pokemons and they have their name, but it's not hard to pronounce. So let us just call them frog. Okay, suppose that this picture is what we see in our video field. Suppose also that we see two frogs. Okay, one frog is physical frog and the other is virtual frog. So we suppose that this frog is not a representation of this frog. They are independent. Okay, and they are phenomenally identical color patches instantiated on both frogs. Okay, and to be clear, we can extract these color patches to this figure. Okay, in this visual experience, R patch is caused by physical blueness, L patch is caused by virtual blueness, and they both produce the same phenomenal blue content in a single experience, right? So this kind of experience is very common in augmented reality or mixed reality, in which both physical properties and virtual properties can yield the same phenomenal content. Okay, so we have the problem of mixed reality. If that experience is possible, then Fregean representationalism faces a very serious problem. And here's my argument. Premise one: an experience is veridical only if all its local contents are caused by extension. And this is a veridical condition of overall experience. Every account of veridicality will accept that. Okay. And premise two: the property that causes R is different from the property that causes L. And this is a setup of that experience. So if that experience is possible, then this premise holds true. And premise three: a single experience's phenomenally identical local contents pick out the same type of property as extension. This premise is implied by representationalism. And since the extension fixation is a type-type relation, that is the relation between the type of phenomenal content and the type of extension property. So it is impossible for a single experience to involve a certain type of content whose token has different extension. Okay. So therefore, a Fregean representationalist must accept the conclusion, MRC, this experience cannot be veridical. So the problem is very serious because MRC can generalize. Since most experiences in mixed reality involve the same phenomenal content being stably caused by different properties, so experiences in mixed reality are largely illusory. So in short, virtual veridicalism doesn't hold in mixed reality. Okay, so some Fregean might reject MRC by saying like, okay, so what does it matter? Virtual veridicalism holds true only in the pure virtual reality. Why do we need to concern about mixed reality, right? Here's my reply. First, most VR nowadays are literally mixed reality, which are the case where MRC can apply. And unless we are living in the matrix-like world, which could be one of the pure virtual reality, there is always a mixture of reality into our ordinary environment when we use VR technology, right? And virtual veridicalism cannot be true in any mixed reality. That means no matter what the extension of a certain content is in a given mixed reality, the associated experience cannot be veridical. So for example, if the extension of phenomenal blueness is the physical blueness, then the L must be falsidical, right? And if the extension is virtual blueness, then R must be falsidical, right? So either way, this experience cannot be veridical. And hence, Fregean solution can only support virtual veridicalism in matrix-like VR, where no non-virtual property contribute to sensory phenomenology. So at the end, a dilemma arises. If virtual veridicalism concerns mixed reality, this limitation makes Fregean solution unsuccessful to support virtual veridicalism. Okay? But if virtual veridicalism is restricted to matrix-like VR, then virtual veridicalism becomes an insubstantial and uninteresting claim, because what we concern is the VR that we invent by technology, right? And right now we have no matrix-like VR. So in that sense, all VRs we invent right now is kind of mixed reality. Okay, so that's my conclusion. Neither Fregean solution nor Chalmers defense nor both supports virtual veridicalism. And virtual veridicalism should be supported by the theory of content that simultaneously accommodates systematic perceptual veridicality in non-virtual, virtual, and mixed reality. And we should find another way to defend virtual veridicalism in order to overcome the problem of mixed reality. And that is the positive solution to the first home. And since I motivated at the beginning, we need virtual veridicalism to address the perceptual veridicality in most VR contexts. So I think that is the good way to solve the problem I raised in this presentation. So thank you, and I apologize that many things are going too fast. So if you have any common discussion or many questions, don't hesitate to shoot the email to me. And yeah, thank you for all of you.
Thank you so much, and yeah, very well deserved. And a couple of questions left. Let's first start with Sorin. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Great presentation. Thank you so much. Well, my question is going back to the phenomenal properties. You're talking about the redness and the fact that, let's say, the physical and VR properties are pointing to the same phenomenal content, but there was some difference between the physical redness and the virtual redness. Yes. And yes. So, well, I was just thinking that actually, if we look at the neuroscience in the world, there are no colors out there. There's no green like in the grass or the blue in the sky. The roses are not really red, and the fact that the color is the product of several different things like wavelength, the reflectances for that each object reflects, right? There are certain wavelengths, and the individual wavelengths are actually not colors. And you know, we have actually certain color cones that respond to certain ranges and of wavelength. Have that neuroscience story. So I was thinking about the difference between physical redness and virtual redness.
At least we know that the physical redness is some kind of surface reflectance profile that can yield the wavelengths that triggers our phenomenal red experience, right? And so we can have a hypothesis if virtual redness is just exactly the physical redness, and that could be a possibility in my presentation. So if virtual redness is exactly the physical redness, then we might not need such kind of a complex theory. But as I framed the problem here, we need not suppose such kind of identity. So that can be what neuroscientists are going to investigate, and I will be happy if there are some new investigation, new evidence about that to be found out. Yeah. So at least okay, because we are talking about virtual properties, and if we think that okay, virtual redness is just physical redness, and my argument might fail, but I can change the different property to have the same argument. For example, there are some properties that yields like triangle experience, right? And we know that in the physical world, what it yields my triangle experience is just something triangle, but in virtual reality, there need not be, right? So if we can have such a experience that some virtual properties, which is not triangle, that yields normally yields my triangle experience, and this framing still works. Yeah, so I thank you for this consideration, and I think we might have different account on different kinds of property across VR and non-VR environment. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much, Tung, for the answer. And so again, for the question, next up, we have a question from Chen Yu. Wonderful meeting you, and please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. It's very interesting. So I think I have a similar kind of question. So I didn't quite get your notion of veridicality, and I didn't quite get the distinguishment between the physical redness and the virtual redness. So from the explanation you just gave, it seems to me that you seem to regard like physical properties as being like truly real, and that seems to me a little bit problematic. And you seem to need more argument to support that, because scientific realism is not endorsed by everyone. And I guess the more general question is that what is your definition of virtual reality, and what is essentially different between virtual reality and reality, like non-virtual reality, I guess.
Yeah, so thank you. These two questions are what I assume and skipped in this presentation, but yeah, thank you for clarification. So the first one, the veridicality, is a relation between the perceptual experience and the world, right? And for this veridicality condition to be built, we have to know the extension of our perceptual content, right? So the first thing is to fix the content of the perceptual, fix the extension of the perceptual content, so that we can talk about the veridicality, right? So we can have an analogy in language. So when we talk about water, what do we mean by water? If we mean water by X, Y, Z, then we know that in this world, when we use water, they are all false, because there are no X, Y, Z, they are H2O, right? So the same thing can be applied to the perceptual content. So first thing, what I'm going to argue in the third part is just to fix the extension of perceptual content. And once we have the perceptual, the extension of perceptual content, then we can have the veridicality extension, veridicality condition. Yeah. And the second, how do I define virtual reality? I have no clear definition right now, but we can have some first pass regarding our virtual technology. So when we have when we wear the VR goggle and we perceive the 3D environment without without the perceptual discontinuity, and that could be a virtual world or virtual environment, and I assume them to be real, so that I can talk about the veridical relation between content and the worldly thing. But yeah, thank you. That is the further question for me to think about, how I argue for the reality of virtual things and virtual properties.
All right, thank you so much, Tung, for the answer, and Chen Yu for the question. I feel like I want to answer, I want to ask a follow-up to both Sogin and Chen Yu's questions. So this is going to be very half-baked and sort of on the fly, but the thought seems to be that I'm not exactly sure about how you want to characterize Fregean content. And the reason I say this is that if we just look at the slide we had up here a moment ago, when you were answering Sogin, there was the Chalmers 2004 quote.
This one?
Right. Right, that one. So here, if we just take a look at the way you characterize phenomenal modes of presentation, it's not obvious to me that that's really doing the work it's supposed to. So the reason I say that is the phrase you have in between quotes, right, is the property normally causes experiences of that content in the subject under certain perceptual conditions. So this seems to suggest a kind of response dependence view. When is the content of my visual experience phenomenal redness? Well, when I'm having the experience in question in typical circumstances that would prompt somebody who's a normal perceiver or something of the sort to have that sort of experience.
Yes.
Notice that's consistent with the kind of causally gnomic view of perceptual content. It's also consistent with a kind of short arm conceptual role view of perceptual content. And none of those imply that the modes of presentation in question are phenomenal rather than say functional.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so it seems as though when you say that phenomenal modes of presentation are conditions on extension, something like, I just wonder if the analogy in question isn't a bit tenuous. So maybe you want to say that that would count as a sufficient condition for having a phenomenal mode of presentation, or maybe you just want to say phenomenal modes of presentation are a bit like that. Or I'm not exactly sure exactly how to cash that out, but you know, that's one thing that just concerned phenomenal modes of presentation. And then I have a sort of quick follow-up pertaining to how this might or might not relate to Fregean representationalism. But I just wonder what you think about this.
Yeah, thank you. The characterization of phenomenal mode of presentation is a kind of hard questions for Fregean representation. That's true. And we can have an analogy to for the ease of discussion. We can have an analogy in language. So when we talk about the evening star and the morning star, they all refer to the Venus, right? And the evening star and the morning star are just mode of presentation of that extension. So in that sense, we can at first have some sense to characterize this extension, and then we are going to characterize what exactly is the mode of presentation in the case of perceptual experience, right? And this mode of presentation, Chomsky just characterized it. It is the mode of how the phenomenal characters arise with respect to the certain extension in different conditions. And yeah, you're right that we have to have a clear individuation of the group of subject and the group of perceptual conditions, because without the clear definition of what kind of subject is that and what kind of condition is that, then the phenomenal mode of presentation would be problematic. Yeah. And why Fregean appeal to normally cause here is just for them to have some perceptual history to fix on the extension, to fix the extension on the content, because in different world we might have the same phenomenal character, but these phenomenal characters might signal different property in the world. So that's how Fregean wants to solve. And yeah, I agree with that. There are some nuance that should be clarified.
Good. So let me just very briefly sort of segue into what I thought was a different question, but now from what you're saying, it seems like it's very much related. So what you've been doing was trying to salvage some form of VV with respect to, well, and you thought that, look, it might seem as though Fregean representationalism is a good candidate. And then you're saying, look, we can mount this dilemma against it. So if I get that right, it's this sort of picture. And now the question is, why did you pick Fregean representationalism as a candidate? Why wouldn't any narrow content view have been just as workable?
Yeah, actually, some internalist view are workable in that picture. But why I pick Fregean is that the first Chalmers himself proposed Fregean framework. So I think there should be some connection here. And the second one is that I in my another project, I have arguing against other theories and arguing that, okay, they either face the serious problem, or they cannot be the candidate theory of my picture here. So yeah, for example,
Yeah.
there are
Sorry, just as a quick follow-up. So it seemed to me as though, for instance, it would be closer to the spirit of say, Gabe Segal's view to say that phenomenal modes of presentation are conditions on extension. If we think of, say, Chalmers's, one version of Chalmers's 2D view, it would seem as though, well, they're not, right? And so it just seems as though that would have been a more natural candidate to pick from. But since you're criticizing it anyway, I just wonder, yeah, so which target is best to shoot down is a tricky question, sort of dialectically speaking. But yeah. So thanks so much for that. If you've if there are some more questions, or I see a question from Steph. Steph, would you come up here? Sure. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Yen Tung. So if you'd like to say some more, go for it. Before we move on to the next question, it's whatever you prefer.
Oh, okay. So the last word is just that why I target Fregean representation is that it provides a good framework to accommodate why two different kinds of experience with the same phenomenology can have different extension. But the problem I raise is that, okay, even though you have this theoretical framework to explain that, you cannot accommodate the similar case within single experience. Yeah. So
right.
I just move two group of experience to the single experience. And if that is the case, then Fregean representation cannot accommodate that. Yeah.
Yeah, it just seems it's a fascinating project, and congratulations. It just seems as though the natural response to all of this is to fiddle with the notion of veridicality, and yeah, add 1 star, add a couple of stars, and come up with these sort of more sophisticated 2D notions of veridicality. But anyway, so thanks so much for that question from Steph. Steph, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. It was a very nice and challenging presentation, and somehow I related it with the presentation from the beginning of the day of Chingiz Pasha. I think it's this is the right pronunciation of the name. Yes. And if you can go back in your presentation to exactly the last slide.
Okay, sure.
With the picture of the phenomenal this one, yes. Okay, so okay. Here the idea is that the phenomenal redness determine the physical redness and the virtual redness. But in Chingiz's presentation before, we found out that there is another kind of device that can influence our perception. And it's an electrical ESD, electrical stimulation device. And with this kind of device, imagine that you have a VR experience from goggles and an ESD in the same time. And let's say that there is a science software, some software in that ESD device able to modify your perception of redness. So the reality, the virtual reality, will offer you redness, but you were not able to see that redness. So the idea is that when we mix this so strongly, that this kind of stimuli and our experiences, I don't think that Frege has been able to imagine that kind of changing in our consciousness and in our way of perceive the world. And also, I don't think that this sentence, the property normally causes experiences, is a valid one, because no one property causes an experience for someone. All the time there are many properties. There is a context. There are situations. Sometimes a red is reddish, sometimes is not. So what do you think about that? Do you think that a model can grasp this very, very complicated phenomenal reality and our perception about it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so if there is no property out there, but something magically just caused my religious experience, then I think Fregean will happy to say that, okay, so that's always illusion, because even though phenomenal awareness has extension, there's no extension out there. So I think, yeah, that would be the simplest response to that question. And then yeah, I agree that there are different, even though in the same conditions, there might be different properties that yield the same phenomenal character. So that is why Fregean wants to appeal to the definition of normal cause under such the certain perceptual condition, because they think that the same phenomenal content or same phenomenal character doesn't necessarily point out the certain property in the world, because they might point out different properties in under different conditions, even for different subjects. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much for that. And I wonder, wonderful suggestion, Tung. I wonder if this might also address something I was asking earlier about narrow content views. That it might be a leg up for the neo-Fregean, so to speak. Yeah, very interesting. If there are some other questions or comments, well, if not, please join me in thanking once more Tung. Quite nice. Thanks so much. And without further ado, let's move on, if you agree.